Okay, just whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you very much to everyone here who has joined. This session is on peace and conflict, some reflections on the International Day of Peace. So welcome to those of you joining us from wherever you are. I think just I'll be very brief in my introduction to this session. Want this to be as interactive as possible with the limited time that we have. But first off, just wishing you all a happy International Day of Peace. Unfortunately, on this International Day of Peace, I think it's no secret that the world finds itself in a pretty perilous state when it comes to global peace and security. We need to go into detail here, and I'm sure our speakers will provide plenty of context here, but I think it's clear that the world is clearly backsliding on progress towards SDG 16 plus and the SDGs overall. We've heard this throughout the past couple of days through the People's Assembly, but also that the world is significantly less peaceful than in 2015 when the SDGs were adopted. And I think we're nearly to the halfway point to 2030. So this session is really about unpacking, where are some of those key challenges, especially for civil society, and where do we need to go, what does civil society need to do to get us back on track, especially when it comes to issues around peace and conflict. So we'll have a handful of speakers provide their thoughts and experiences around the areas that they work on around peace and conflict, give us a breakdown of the challenges and opportunities, and then hopefully for the second half of this discussion, have an interactive dialogue with all of you to kind of unpack where those additional areas are that we can collectively collaborate and mobilize around in 2023 and beyond. So just housekeeping purposes, just for the speakers, if you can kindly keep your remarks to around 5 or 6 minutes each, just so we can provide plenty of time for the interactive discussion, since we only have about 55 minutes to basically solve global peace and conflict in this session. So I'll just get right into it, starting off with our first speaker. We have Maggie Williams, who is from the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Society. So Maggie, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, John, and wonderful to see all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yes, I would echo John's initial message of Happy International Day of Peace, despite the kind of extraordinary amount of non-peacefulness that we see around us every day and everywhere. As mentioned, my name is Maggie Williams. I am the SDG 16 plus lead for the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies, which is an initiative at the Center of International Cooperation at NYU. A quick note, the Pathfinders are a multi-stakeholder partnership of 43 countries, as well as civil society organizations, international organizations, and private sector actors, working specifically to accelerate delivery of SDG 16 plus. So the targets within the 2030 agenda that touch on peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. In addition to the Pathfinders, CIC also works on multilateralism and IFIs, and has a program on prevention and crisis that I can also speak more to at a later stage if there is interest, but I know there's limited time. So very quickly on the Having Global Violence work of the Pathfinders as it specifically relates to today's discussion, there are kind of various focuses, if you will, of our work. One is a very kind of high level political task force. One is a more urban cities level initiative called Peace in Our Cities, and another is more regional and gender focused, called the Gender Equality Network for Small Arms Control. All of these kind of have different outputs, and I'm happy to speak more to any of them if of interest. But I thought I would kind of open with that brief overview to say that we are very much interested in kind of a collective effort and a collective push towards more peaceful societies, and are therefore that much more grateful to be a part of this call today. So to speak specifically to what we see kind of ahead of us and to the agenda at hand, as John mentioned, we are in an extraordinarily perilous state, and Foreign Policy this week actually had an opening article that was entitled, "What is the UN for?" So I think a lot of people are kind of questioning where we are as a global community, where we are as part of a UN configuration in terms of addressing the various challenges that we have before us. And I think the messages that we've so far heard out of UNGA is that we are extremely far off from achieving the SDGs. There's an enormous amount of human suffering taking place in crises that splash across headlines and also that are often forgotten. And there's also an enormous need and hunger for some type of solution. So let me go ahead and talk about what we see coming down the pike in terms of where we can all collectively mobilize. And I know some of my colleagues also on the call will then kind of go into greater detail on some of the topics mentioned. But the first thing I would mention is the SDG Summit that will be taking place next year. And that will mark, so 2023. And this will mark the halfway point of the 2030 agenda. As you all may remember, when adopting the SDGs, the UN and member states set out to significantly reduce all forms of violence everywhere, 16.1. We are very far off that mark. And even before COVID, the experts feared an increase in violent deaths if decisive action was not taken, with potential triggers of violence such as inequality and polarization, injustice already on the rise. This is pre-COVID, pre-Ukraine, pre-fallout of Ukraine, pre-current food, energy, global crisis with various spillover effects globally. So the SDG Summit, I think, provides an opportunity for us all to kind of come together and galvanize around the progress that we'd like to see. This is in the fall of 2023. In addition to the SDG Summit, there will be a ministerial summit that will preempt the Summit of the Future, which is now pushed back to 2024. Why is this? Why do we think this is important? The SDG Summit in and of itself, it provides an opportunity for the international community to come together and to push member states for greater action, sustainable action, positive action through national development plans, national strategic plans, various line ministries, et cetera. But then we also have the ministerial summit that will kind of tee us up for the new agenda for peace, which is part of the Summit of the Future. So I know I'm touching on a lot of kind of high level summits now, but I'm hoping that my colleagues will kind of go into it and then we can have a greater discussion. So we have the SDG Summit, we have the Ministerial Summit, and then we have the Summit of the Future in 2024. And the Summit of the Future in 2024 is where this thing called the New Agenda for Peace is really supposed to land. And the new agenda for peace, as we have heard in various consultations and from the Secretary General himself, is meant to be kind of innovative, thoughtful, and to try to do things differently, to not do business as usual. So from our perspective, what we are hoping to come out of this new agenda for peace, and there will be various, and the reason why I'm mentioning is there will be various kind of negotiations and deliberations that will take place in the next year and a half or so, and I think opportunities for input. But there are probably 5 things, 5 to 6 things that we would think that the new agenda for peace would want to address based on kind of the input that already went into it. So, and again, it's a moving target, but I would just quickly mention a few of these things and then stop talking. The first thing is the future of UN in mediation and good offices with a look to the Odessa grain deal. The second is the future of UN peace operations. There has not been a new peace operation since 2014, and many of those that do exist are struggling. So maybe this means greater attention for special political missions, but we would really like to see nationally owned prevention and violence reduction strategies. We would also suggest a strong focus on urban violence There is much greater return on investment in many ways in addressing urban violence than necessarily in conflict-related deaths. And then we would also like to see a greater focus on disarmament and small arms. And then finally, a much greater focus on youth and young people's meaningful and non-tokenistic inclusion in decision-making processes, particularly at national and subnational levels. So this was a very quick run through kind of the opportunities that we see for collective mobilization and advocacy, along with national and subnational implementation that all of us can kind of work towards in the next couple of years. But I think we are coming to this at a critical moment with UNGA now, the SDG Summit in 2023, the Ministerial Summit in 2023, and the lead up to the Summit of the Future, and then the Summit of the Future in 2024 with the new agenda for peace. So John, with that listing of multiple summits, I will turn it over to you, also with the hope that some of my colleagues will kind of go into greater detail and then we can have a more integrated conversation about this.
Great, thanks a lot, Maggie. And yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that there's a lot to unpack here. There are many challenges, but I think just as many opportunities ahead of us in the next year. So thanks for outlining just a handful of those. I'll hand it over now to Kavita Desai from the Quaker UN office here in New York. And Kavita is also part of the UN Prevention Platform. So Kavita, please, over to you.
Thanks, John, and thanks to GCAP and all the organizers for bringing us all together today on International Peace Day to talk about what's happening in the world. So like John mentioned, I represent the Quaker UN office. We have been around working at the UN for almost 75 years, and we believe that the UN will only fulfill the lasting peace aspect of its mandate when peace initiatives truly respond to community needs, and we seek to build bridges between the UN and New York and the voices and perspectives of people on the ground. So from what do we know, starting off this 77th session of the UN is that there are an overwhelming number of crises that we're facing, including increasing militarization around the world, and the reality is that current systems do not work. So yesterday, the Secretary General at the opening of the debate talked about the fact that the only way to approach any major global challenge is through a coalition of the world and not through a single power or a select group. The SDG also called for a return to the core mission of the United Nations, achieving sustaining peace. So this means a peace that is inclusive and incorporates diplomatic tools, good offices, dialogue, mediation, prioritizes women's participation, and also prioritizes prevention and peace building. He also listed a number of other elements that make up his vision. So with the Our Common Agenda report and the new Agenda for Peace, these two are vehicles to center and refocus the global community. So the question then becomes, how do we pursue these elements and what can civil society build momentum towards? So Maggie gave kind of an overview of all of the big moments that are going to happen in the next 2 years. But what are the practical steps of how we can all mobilize together? So we know modalities for the Summit of the Future were just adopted, and this gives us the timeline that Maggie mentioned. So there are a lot of things that are starting now that we all need to be aware of and kind of working towards. So next year we have the SDG heads of state. This happens every 4 years. There will still be HLPF, but this is going to be a big moment in just coming together at wherever we are in the pandemic by next September, and also how are we going to accelerate SDG implementation ahead of the 2030 landmark year. We have the preparatory ministerial meeting that will happen around the same time next September, and then we have a year from then until the Summit of the Future. So it gives us roughly 2 years to get to figure out what we're campaigning for and what we're going to advocate for. The Summit of the Future, the theme of that is going to be multilateral solutions for a better tomorrow. And we know that the Summit of the Future is going to adopt a declaration that's going to be called a Pact for the Future. We also know that there will be space for engagement of civil society and youth. but that with this timeline of moments throughout the next year, there are a few other things that are going to happen. So co-facilitators for everything related to the Summit of the Future are going to be appointed between now and the end of October. Work towards the SDG Summit is going to begin in full steam next spring. So the kind of timeline from now to 2024 is shrinking a little bit, with like a lot of things that will start moving very quickly in the next few weeks. So the new agenda for peace, what is it going to be? It is going to be an input into the Summit of the Future. So that means that we not only need to advocate for a strong document, but that has to translate into working towards what from the new agenda for peace is going to be taken and adopted and actionable in the Summit Declaration. So we have next year's HLPF, the SDG Summit, the ministerial, and then a year to work towards the Summit of the Future. So that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at and what we know right now. So the Civil Society UN Prevention Platform is co-facilitated by GPAC and my office at CUNO, and we work to support the UN's prevention agenda through strengthening coordination and information sharing between civil society organizations and the UN at all levels. So the platform was essentially created for exactly these moments of reflection and innovation. We will be working to support the new Agenda for Peace process and the lead up to the Summit of the Future, with a focus on mainstreaming prevention at the core of the new Agenda for Peace, and also linked throughout all of the OCA processes. We've just recently had our first discussion, and I have a few key takeaways that I can share with you all. So first off, that the UN should provide a space for showcasing the benefits of conflict prevention. Doing this will trickle down to the regional, national, and local action and help to destigmatize conflict prevention. The UN is a key player in building political will for conflict prevention, and highlighting success stories and other benefits is a key tactic in creating a network, a global network of conflict prevention investors. We also think that the new Agenda for Peace should establish a global framework for institutionalizing conflict prevention, a central aspect to building partnerships at all levels and integrating priorities from different levels. So this means that the UN, national, regional, and local voices all bring different and valuable perspectives to conflict prevention policy, and uniting these voices allows for the best chance of mitigating violent conflict. We also think that the process should include a diverse set of actors working at different levels. So having a diverse group of voices all reflected should be at the forefront of conflict prevention, and this needs to prioritize local peace builders, women, and youth. And the last main point that came out of our discussion is that the multilateral system must support more investment in prevention. So investment comes in different forms. This is not limited to finances, resources, and academic work, but if this is taken seriously, investment in conflict prevention will pay off. So as the prevention platform, we are hoping for a strong process that will not only bring out these perspectives, but also ensure that all voices have a chance to meaningfully engage and influence both the new Agenda for Peace and the outcome of the Summit for the Future. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot, Kavita, and also for unpacking some of those initial recommendations from the UN Prevention Platform thus far. I think one thing, that you mentioned that, the Secretary General's was very blunt in his assessment in his speech yesterday, and mentioned he also said that the current systems don't work. And I think the point of these processes at the global level, and the whole point of our common the SDGs, our common agenda, is to see how the system can be more responsive to the needs of people. And I think that's this makes it a really important milestone for us over the next couple of years, looking into the Summit of the Future for engaging at the global level. So I think we've heard a couple of reflections from the global level of discussions around peace and conflict. We also have a couple of colleagues here from the national level. I think part of the role of civil society, especially around these discussions, is to really ground them in, in reality and in lived experiences, especially from those living in conflict specifically. So we have a couple of colleagues. I'll start first with Theophilus Ekpon, who is from the Center for Sustainable Development and Education in Africa, based in Nigeria. So please, Theophilus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John, for this opportunity. And I would like to start that the adoption of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security in December 2015 has brought a renewed focus on the youth, peace, and security agenda. And since the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security, the Global Civil Society Platform on Peace Building and State Building and the Center for Sustainable Development and Education in Africa has been collaborating both at the global level and at the national level to ensure the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security. At the global level, the work has been via the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace, and Security that is presently coordinating global efforts at implementing the UN Security Council Resolution 2250. And again, I just wanted to say that without a focus on young people, there will be no achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I say that because young people constitute a quarter of world's population. And if a quarter of world's population, very agile, with strength and vigor, talents and opportunities, are not integrated into global, national, and local platforms and frameworks, then those frameworks will not be able to achieve their aims and objectives. So this is why we must ensure that young people are actively engaged in implementing both global, national, and local frameworks. The CSPPS and the CSDA have also collaborated at a national level to ensure globally, we have 4 countries that have gone ahead to develop their national action plans on youth, peace, and security. The first one is Finland, who launched its national action plan on youth, peace, and security in 2021. And Nigeria launched its own, the second globally, in November 2021. And very recently, we have the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Philippines launched their national action plans on youth, peace, and security. This means that national governments and stakeholders are taking this agenda very seriously to ensure that we prevent conflict and resolve conflict via early warning and response systems. And this National Action Plan on Youth, Peace, and Security builds on existing policies, such as the National Youth Policy. It also builds on the National Security Strategy, the Women, Peace, and Security National Action Plan, and also continental frameworks and sub-youth peace and security, and the ECOWAS youth policy. Young people worked collaboratively with government, development partners, civil society to ensure a robust consultation and engagements towards developing the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace, and Security. And this also involved young people working to draft the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace, and Security. And right now, as we talk, as I address you right now, young people are actually on Youth, Peace and Security that is presently driving the implementation of the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security in Nigeria. And young people are right there at the table. For example, 2 young persons are co-chairs out of the 3 co-chairs of the Nigeria Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security. So this means that young people are actually on the driver's seat towards ensuring the implementation of the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security. National implementation. First of all, disseminating the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security. Just remember, I mentioned that during the development, we consulted widely with young people across Nigeria. Now we are disseminating the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security. Young people are running with the NAP. They are socializing the NAP across the country, running with it, holding leaders accountable. And state governments, that is at the sub-national level, are already developing their own state action plans on youth, peace and security, because states within Nigeria have their own differences. They have their own challenges. They have their own realities. So they are also developing their own strategies to ensure effective implementation at the state level. We're also involved in mapping of stakeholders because Nigeria is a very rich and diverse nation. When I mean rich in culture, and is very diverse. So we are trying to map the stakeholders. We are in an advanced stage of mapping stakeholders who are working in the area of youth, peace and security in Nigeria to ensure that everyone is engaged proactively towards the implementation of the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security. So and again, there are issues of reintegration and rehabilitation of young people who have been exposed to violence, and also young people who are survivors of violence. And this is being addressed seriously in the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security. The issue of partnerships and participation of young people being addressed, especially funding the interventions and innovations of young people, is also being addressed in this implementation phase. I guess my time is up. I'll stop there for now. Thank you all.
Great, thanks very much, Theophilus. And I think this is a really great example of youth leading the charge in localizing an otherwise global agenda, the YPS agenda. I think this is a really great example. If you can, I'm sure you have some documents and information to share in the chat box. If you can share more information with us there, that would be great as well. So our final speaker before we move to the interactive discussion, we have Nicobile Moyo from Voices in the Vision for Africa, based in Zimbabwe. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, colleagues. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you are. Name is Nicobile Moyo, as the introduction went through. With the limited time, allow me to just jump straight into it here. I think in general, there's been great domestication of some of these global normative frameworks into the regional and even right down to national level. Some of these normative frameworks that the UN has crafted. But there seems to be sometimes a bit of a challenge. In fact, the big challenge comes in when they are then supposed to be domesticated within, specifically more at national level. That's where sometimes you see from a structural perspective where some of the challenges come in, specifically more when you look at it, let's say from the global south kind of like perspective. Some of those key challenges come in, let's say, from some of the key issues around those. I would like to speak about issues, let's say, that I can mention. One, the support, let's say, even from the UN perspective itself, in terms of how then some of these normative frameworks are domesticated, popularized, and contextualized within some of these spaces. Secondly, sometimes some of the issues are issues of really the lack of political will itself from the political spaces themselves, because of some of the connotations that they come with. But allow me then maybe to speak to some of the key issues that I think are key when we look at the peace and security space in this particular instance. Some of the key leading issues that have been very challenging I think first and foremost is one that's been a little bit quite silent, but very key that I would like to speak about is maybe to point out is climate change issues, how climate change, specifically when you look at its nexus in how climate change has become like a threat multiplier across all sectors, from the social, economic, and political. And how slow some of the spaces we are in have been slow to adapt and to mitigate some of these issues. Of course, some of it being resource challenged, but of course, to a great extent, just the knowledge part of it and saying, so these are some of these issues. So you find that climate change, there is that we've been doing a whole lot of research around that also, you know, in exploring that nexus between climate change and peace and security issues, how it's become a threat multiplier in all these sectors and the different spaces that we work with. And I think the previous speaker spoke a little bit, spoke a whole lot more actually about the YPS side of issues. And I won't speak much about that, but I'd like to say also that specifically when you look at the youth and women specific also sectors also, there's also that key need also to integrate them, and national action plans have been one of the key ways. But countering and preventing some of these issues from a preventative perspective. But one key issue also maybe just from a departing space as far as the YPS and WPS, especially when you look at the national action plans that are currently taking place, is that there's strong need for them to be very much futuristic. They should not just address the current, the here and now kind of challenges that women and young people specifically are facing now, but they need to be futuristic in the sense that if you look at it from a global perspective, some of the challenges that we're facing are bound to change some of the context that we are used to currently. So there is that need then for that when we craft such action plans, we need then to be futuristic and be able to look at 10, 15, 20 years from now and try to look at some of the challenges, the new and emerging challenges that are coming up along those lines. And another correlated issue I'd like to speak about maybe is the increased fragilities that have taken place, even from specifically at the national level, even at the continental level also. If you look at some of the challenges that are there at a global level, some of the conflicts that have started and how the ripple effects have been in terms of how they've exacerbated issues of economic, social and political fragilities in other countries. You're talking of the energy crisis, the economic crisis that it's causing also. And this is also compounded by the climate change issues that I've spoken about too. You will see that these fragilities have continued to worsen, and there's a need then to relook at some of the normative frameworks that we use to look at these challenges. There is a strong need even at a national level to look at how we adapt and how we respond to some of these challenges, because they are no longer compatible to some of the challenges that we're having. And we need also to relook at some of these frameworks. And even at the global level, you'll find that even from the African perspective, one of the key issues has been the issues of a seat at the table, specifically when you talk of the Security Council. And given that 80% of the Security Council agenda issues are conflicts or that are taking place within that particular continent, yet they don't have a permanent seat to even decide and speak into some of these issues that are taking place there. And this is an opportune time, given some of the geopolitics that's taking place, where such continents, even Africa specifically also, can have a little bit of a say and a push, hopefully then to get a seat in those particular spaces. And then one of the key concerns also, when you look at it specifically from a CSO perspective, is the shrinking space. And this shrinking space is not only just at a continental or at a national level, where you find that, sometimes you will find that governments are tweaking sometimes a little bit of their constitution, so they'll have, to hold on to power, to suppress citizens, because of these fragilities and challenges that I've alluded to before. But you find that even that shrinking space, specifically for civic societies, even extending even to the UN itself, where even currently how civic society has been excluded in some of the key discussion and plenary sessions where they're supposed to come in and put in a voice. And that's a challenge that we need to collectively be speaking to, and some of the key platforms such as the C4UN and various others, specifically in this time and age, that we need to be speaking to and directly challenging and looking for champions that can even, in some of these developed countries to actually speak to these issues within the UN corridors itself. And another issue, I think that's very important, I think as I wind up, since my time is up, is that we need to relook at how we are doing funding in the peace and security space, where specifically even right from the top, from the UN side of issues, that funding needs to be able to reach the areas where the conflicts are taking place and really directly empower the people within those specific places, and cut off a little bit on some of the middle institutions that are there in between, as when there's, it's a $10,000 grant reaches the affected communities, it's only something like 3,000 sometimes. So there is need for direct funding to these particular spaces and direct capacity building and lesser use of expatriates who come in periodically and then leave back to their countries with no skills transfer. That's why we see reoccurring of some of these conflicts in some of these spaces where we then think the UN and some of the actors are failing, but these are some of the key challenges. I think I'll end here for now. Thank you for your time, colleagues.
Great, thanks very much, Nicobili. I think a lot of things that we've just discussed over these past 4 speakers, I think it's clear that there are many challenges, at global level. There are many opportunities, but I think it's really important, obviously, for us to consider how people are impacted at the national and local level, and see how we as civil society, assuming that we are given the space in these discussions around the summit and Summit of the Future, how can we bring some of these the stories, the experiences, the asks, the needs of colleagues that work at the national and local level. So I think this interactive part, we really want to unpack that a little bit further. So we've heard from our 4 speakers on some of the challenges and some of the opportunities going forward. So we'll open it up for an interactive discussion now. If my colleague Ellery can start the Mentimeter. So we'll open the floor. If you'd like to come in and lay out some of the challenges that you're facing or the challenges that you think we should be prioritizing going forward around peace and conflict, please raise your hand and we can you can intervene from the floor. But also we have another option as well, because we don't have that much time, if you'd like to provide your thoughts through Mentimeter. It's pretty simple, I think. The instructions at the top here, you go to menti.com on your mobile device or your computer and use the code here, which we'll also put in the chat box. So this will give those that don't have an opportunity to intervene from the floor to still provide your thoughts on the questions that we have here. So the first, really, what are some of the challenges that we or you face around fostering more peaceful societies, around SDG 16 plus more broadly? I think we've heard from around many of these issues up to this point, but is there anyone that would like to get us started for the interactive discussion? Please just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Okay. Okay, we have one from the Mentimeter. Someone said systems and processes aren't participative enough. Our approach must be more intersectional and include voices from marginalized groups. Absolutely. I think that's something we've heard from some of the inputs through this discussion in particular, but also through the People's Assembly discussions up to this point. I think one of the challenges that we face really is, when we have these global level discussions, I think many times they're often disconnected from, again, the lived experiences of colleagues that work on the ground. What exactly are their needs? I think we've heard some really great examples of how colleagues have nationalized or localized normative frameworks like youth peace and security and women peace and security, from the global level. But how do we also then do the opposite? How do we bring those voices and experiences to the global level of discussions? We have a couple of other responses now: weak institutions and corruption at the national level, also part of SDG 16 as well. Need to prioritize construction of people-centered data for a proper diagnosis of the challenges we face. Another huge challenge is even when we talk about the HLPF and the VNRs, how do we have an honest assessment of where we are so that we can actually then address some of the challenges or gaps that we have in implementation, which we don't seem to have much of that conversation around these discussions around HLPF. I see Nelia, you have your hand raised. Do you want to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, John. Just to introduce myself, I represent Russian Coalition for Sustainable Development of Russia, yeah. And I just would like to add quickly to this discussion because we know that also right now the conflict ongoing in Ukraine, and today we actually what is happening right now in Russian streets, that people are getting arrested because they are protesting the army mobilization action, which was announced by Russian president today. So yeah, I think it's also one of the major peace challenges right now happening, and I think with possible global impacts, and I think we should not like skip this topic today, and I just wanted to mention it. And in general, what was my observation also during regional forums, and at least the one that was happening in Geneva and HLPF, I think in regional forum we still saw more focus on this topic and discussion somehow by member states, but during HLPF I think it was really not addressed so well as I would probably expected it. But yeah, I think this is only things that I wanted quickly to add to the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Nelia. And actually, I mean, maybe this is a question that we'll put back to the four panelists. Is really a question. You know, we often talk about positive progress. You know, the SDGs are a proactive framework for action. But what do we do in cases where, yeah, like that example from Russia, what do we do in the case that civic space is shrinking or non-existent, and civil society is punished or imprisoned just for speaking their mind, just like the example that we've heard? What do we do as an international community or networks? How do we actually support colleagues that are facing that those difficult circumstances, and how do we make progress around peace or other issues when the government, again, not only just doesn't listen, but actively suppresses civil society voices? So I'm curious if any of the speakers have any thoughts on or suggestions on how to address difficult situations like that, or have any experiences to share. Yeah, sure. Nikabila, please start.
Thank you, John. I think that's a very key question, because those are some of these fragilities that are taking place. But quickly, I would like to point out that solidarity is one of the key issues that we need to be able to speak in one voice and be able to support each other across the regions and across the globe itself. But one of the key things, I think, which was also one of the key things I also needed to mention, was the issue of early warning systems, conflict early warning systems, the key role that they are playing and that they are going to continue to play within the peace and security space at a global level is very important. The reason why is because such incidences, whether you want to say it's in Russia, whether you want to say it's in Asia or in Africa, there is always a systematic process when we see these things happening. I say this because I'm very much working within the early warning space. I coordinate the Southern Africa region under the African Union's Peace and Security Department, which is a total of 16 countries. And you can always pretty much tell before a conflict happens that this is going to happen. There is a systematic pattern of it. And we've seen this happen in all the spaces, including also even within Europe and various other spaces. But the challenge then becomes that within that, we do flag out the early warnings, but the challenge is in the slow response. There is no early response from the relevant offices. And you find that early warning now, even the UN itself through UNDP is prioritizing early warning through what they're calling a dashboard. we're already inputting into, providing data and all that and analysis into those issues. Should we, I think then from a progressive perspective, we need to start integrating and supporting and strengthening early warning and setting up early warning systems across the globe, because then we are able to act from a preventative perspective, foresee them and deal with the issues as they start happening before they escalate into full conflicts. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot, Nikobili. Before we go back to the other panelists, I see a colleague that hasn't intervened yet, Loretta. If you want to provide your brief thoughts on these questions.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Good morning and afternoon. Seriously, I just want to key into what the last speaker said. We have so many early warning platforms, existing even in Nigeria here. But at the end of the day, nobody is responding to those early warnings. Some of them have been analyzed, sent even to security agencies, but there's no response. And at the end of the day, it's like, what the community volunteers who are feeding into those platforms are doing are useless. Because if we, like you said, do we prioritize peace and security? For sure, 100%. Because if we don't, then there won't be any development. There won't be any health. There won't be anything happening around. And people, of course, everywhere, there will be chaos everywhere. So we need to prioritize it. But while we are prioritizing it, we need to look deeply into how responding to those early warnings will assist us and ensure that we have peaceful communities and societies. It is very, very disheartening when we see these trends, we report these trends, and at the end of the day, nobody is taking us serious, nobody is responding. And that is why also the civic space also continue to shrink because of these insecurities. Even the security agencies sometimes won't give you permission or allow you when you request for space to do some things, or open air campaigns and all that. You see them telling you, no, you cannot, because we don't want hoodlums to hijack what you want to do and all that and all that. So it's a very serious issue for us. And if we must increase civic space participation, then we must look seriously at early warnings and follow it up. And another trend we have noticed in Nigeria here is that in major cities, we have these street urchins, logging around main junctions, and it's safe for people, to move in and go out. Sometimes you go into an event center, and by the time you're coming out, street urchins have blocked the exits. They are begging for money, they are pleading for food, they are asking for so many things, and when you do not give, they attack you. That is as bad as it is. So we must prioritize peace and security. We must ensure that we have that civic space to continue to participate and air our view. If not, I don't know what is going to be in the next 2 years. It is really so bad here. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Loretta. I might just ask my colleague Ellery to move to the next question that we have, because I also think we're getting in slightly to the solutions side of the questions that we had. So we've just outlined some of the challenges, again, through the discussion and through the Mentimeter, but now we have a question about addressing some of those challenges. What are some of the best solutions we have for overcoming some of those issues and challenges around peace and conflict? So you can obviously provide your thoughts here on the Mentimeter, because we only have just a handful of minutes left here and a few speakers left. So provide your thoughts on the Mentimeter, but we'll finish here with just a few more speakers. I'll go to, again, George Hashaka, who hasn't intervened yet, and then I'll go to Kavita and Maggie. So George, please. George Hashaka, do you still want to intervene? If not, you can always feel free to provide your inputs in the chat box as well. So maybe I'll move then to Kavita, please.
Thanks, John. Just very quickly to react to a few things. I think that one of the best solutions that we have is that we have done this before. There is a goal 16, there is a goal on inequality. There are all of these targets that form the 16 plus work. So those things were not achieved easily, that there was a huge movement and there was a huge amount of pressure that civil society was able to apply to governments around the world and to shine a light on why peace and development are connected and important and need to be reflected together. So I think that there should be some confidence in just, we were able to do this before. And if we can build some momentum, we have all of these opportunities coming up in the next year. And then also just to really echo what Nigwili said about prevention and early warning systems. So if we can bring attention to what's happening in different situations and try and pressure for some attention and some political will to be built to address some of that. And that also is a way that we can work together and come together on a few of those issues. So those are my kind of 2 cents as we start to wrap up. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Kavita. Maggie, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to all the speakers and those that have participated. I think one of the things that's kind of, I think one of the more important pieces of this conversation is the point on solidarity and the point on lived realities. And in terms of kind of solutions, I think, we do have SDG 16, we have SDG 16 plus, we do have all of these normative frameworks, and they are useful and to be built off of, as kind of was also made clear by Theophilus and the work that's being done on national action plans for 2250. But I think the thing that's would be most useful for all of us basically as we look to 2023 and 2024. So again, HLPF in 2023, SDG Summit in 2023, the pre-ministerial summit for the Summit of the Future, and then the Summit of the Future in 2024 is how do we basically leverage all of these kind of massive intergovernmental processes. And I think the way to do that is to kind of do our best to basically sync up what we have. So whether it's YPS, WPS, the SDGs, SDG 16, AU 2063, regional platforms, there is a way by which we can basically kind of come together as a global community working on peace and security issues to leverage not only our voices, but also the data. So to show where certain types of interventions have worked, why early warning, for example, matters so much, and what happens when you don't have the political will to basically back it up and act on it. What is it that we can do collectively as kind of civil society writ large to better ensure that that kind of local to state to national to regional and then to international advocacy points are being compiled so that we can strengthen implementation. And so, for me, the thing that I think is, again, what was so kind of powerful is what other speakers have shared in terms of why this matters so much. And then what we can do collectively is, as Kavita mentioned, the SG saying that what we need is a coalition of the world, not a coalition of the willing, in order to try to leverage these moments for change and more sustainable action. So that's all I'd say.
Great, thanks a lot, Maggie. I think unfortunately we're out of time. We've been asked to wrap up a few minutes before the hour to leave time to transition to the next session of the People's Assembly. But I just want to say, there were a lot of things for us to unpack in terms of the challenges and the opportunities that we can surely also feed into, the outcomes from the People's Assembly and going forward from here. I think hopefully, this is just the start of the conversations. I mean, like we've heard, throughout this discussion and throughout the past couple of days, I think the opportunity really is ahead of us, leading up to 2023, those critical moments around the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future. I think this is a really important opportunity, as we've heard, to hopefully instigate a little bit more of a change, to how the UN operates and how it becomes a bit more responsive to people, the needs of people, around a multitude of issues. And again, at a critical juncture, halfway to 2030 coming up as well, I think it's a really important opportunity for us as civil society to mobilize around. We've heard a lot of different issues that need to be addressed. I think a lot of the opportunities around how we address those issues through the UN and through multilateralism, other means, at the global level, and how civil society connects those, we've heard, the lived experiences of colleagues, especially those that live in conflict or fragility. How do we bring those voices to the discussions around the SDG Summit and Summit of the Future? So I think kind of that dual side of the advocacy that happens at these big global moments, and then also the storytelling, bringing colleagues' experiences into the discussion. I think kind of a dual focus or a dual need for us in the months and next year and a half or 2 years ahead. So again, hopefully this is the the beginning or a continuation of discussions, and we'll have plenty more going forward. So thanks to all of you for joining. Thanks to the speakers for their inputs and insights as well. And we'll hand back over to colleagues and the organizers of the Summit. So thanks again to everyone for joining, and we'll certainly be in touch following up from this. Thanks, everyone.